for literally thousands of years, there's been one piece of land that has been the ultimate prize. I mean, a center of gravity for empires, a cradle of civilization itself. And that land, of course, is Egypt. From the pharaohs all the way to the sultans, its story is just this relentless cycle of power, of conquest, and honestly, breathtaking resilience. So the big question is, who were the great powers that fought for, won, and ruled this enduring land? Well, let's dive in.
And the Encyclopedia of Rulers of Egypt, which is our main source for this whole explainer, it just puts it perfectly. Egypt wasn't just an ancient civilization. You could argue it was the very first true state. And that deep-rooted history of power and organization, well, that's exactly what made it such a hot commodity, such a coveted prize for pretty much every ambitious ruler who came after.
So yeah, that brings us right to our central question. Once the age of the pharaohs was over, who were the great powers that took control? I gotta tell you, the list is long, the cast of characters is absolutely legendary, and the story? Well, it's nothing short of epic.
All right, so here's where our journey really kicks off. It's the moment when the long reign of the pharaohs finally crumbles, and that opens the door for this first huge wave of foreign conquerors. You've got the Persians, the Greeks, and the dynasty they would eventually set up, the Ptolemies.
And man, it was a total whirlwind of empires. First, you have the mighty Persian Empire sweeping in, and that marks this really dramatic end to thousands of years of native rule. But then, not even 2 centuries later, a new force just storms in from the west, Alexander the Great. And for the Egyptians, he wasn't really a conqueror, he was seen more as a liberator. Now, his death kicks off what we call the Hellenistic Age. That's the period where Greek culture just spread like wildfire, and for Egypt, it meant one of his generals founded the final and probably the most famous of these Greek-led kingdoms, the Ptolemaic dynasty. Now, that first Persian conquest under Cambyses II, let's just say it was notoriously brutal. I mean, he showed open contempt for Egyptian traditions, which, as you can imagine, created some deep resentment. Their rule was all about pure domination, not blending in.
But the Ptolemies, they did a complete 180. They took a totally different approach. Their whole thing was fusing cultures. So you had Greek rulers portraying themselves as pharaohs. They even adopted ancient traditions like royal sibling marriage, which Ptolemy II did. And their strategy was just brilliantly effective. Respect the old while you build the new. They founded Alexandria, and look, it wasn't just some new city. It became the intellectual heartbeat of the entire known world. I'm talking home to the legendary Great Library and a beacon for science and philosophy.
Okay, so after centuries of Greco-Roman rule, another world-changing force arrives on the scene. The rise of Islam would, once again, completely transform Egypt, turning it from just another Mediterranean province into the absolute crown jewel of a new caliphate.
And the transition was incredibly swift. The Roman province fell to the armies of the Rashidun Caliphate way back in 641 AD. Now, for the next few hundred years, Egypt was governed by the Umayyad and Abbasid empires, but from capitals that were far away. But, eventually, a new power was going to rise up and make Egypt the center of its own empire, and that was the Fatimids.
See, the Fatimids didn't just rule Egypt, they remade it in their own image. They founded a brand new capital, Al-Qahira, which means the victorious, and of course we know it today as Cairo. And right at its heart, they built Al-Azhar, which very quickly became one of the most important centers of learning in the entire Islamic world, a role it still holds to this day, which is pretty incredible.
So this period saw a huge religious and political shift. The Fatimids, you see, were Shia Ismaili Muslims. Now, that's a branch of Islam that basically put them in direct rivalry with the Sunni Abbasid Caliph over in Baghdad. But then, the Ayyubid dynasty that came after them, they restored Sunni Islam, the majority tradition, as the state doctrine and turned Egypt's focus toward a brand new and pretty existential threat, the European Crusaders over in the Holy Land.
And this ushers in a whole new era, one that's really defined by military rulers. These guys saw Egypt not just as a prize to be won, but as a fortress, the defender of the Islamic world against huge threats coming from both the West and the East. And really, the defining figure of this whole era is Saladin. I mean, his name is legendary, not just for his military brilliance, but for his chivalry too. He's the one who unified the Muslim factions. And then, in his defining moment, he absolutely crushed the Crusader armies at the Battle of Hattin, which paved the way for the recapture of Jerusalem. But just as the Crusader threat was starting to be managed, an even greater danger appeared on the horizon. I'm talking about the Mongol Empire, a force that seemed just unstoppable. They had already conquered most of Asia and had just sacked and destroyed Baghdad, the historic heart of the Islamic Caliphate. This was a whole different level of threat. So all eyes turned to Egypt. The only major Muslim power left standing was the new Mamluk Sultanate, and get this, it was a regime founded by former slave soldiers who had seized power from the Ayyubids. So what you have is a showdown for the ages, the world's most feared conquerors versus an army of warrior slaves. You can't make this stuff up.
The year is 1260, and this was the moment that would decide the fate of the entire region. No exaggeration.
So at the Battle of Ain Jalut, which means the Spring of Goliath, the Mamluks did the unthinkable. They handed the Mongols their first major defeat, and in doing so, they shattered their aura of invincibility. And this victory, it didn't just save Egypt, it literally stopped the Mongol tide from sweeping across North Africa. And well, it cemented the Mamluks as the new superpowers of the Middle East.
Now, the Mamluks ruled for over 250 years, and it's really important to remember it wasn't all just war. The reign of Sultan Qaitbay, for example, shows a whole other side to their rule. He was a great builder, commissioning these magnificent forts, mosques, and schools. His long and stable reign is remembered as a golden age for Mamluk art and architecture. Seriously, the intricate designs and monumental structures they built fundamentally shaped the skyline of Islamic Cairo, leaving this physical legacy of their power and piety that you can literally still walk through today.
But as with all empires, the Mamluks' time would eventually come to an end. You know how the story goes, and their fall wasn't the end of Egypt's story, not by a long shot. It was simply another turn in this unending cycle of power. So, in 1517, the Mamluks faced a new superpower, one armed with a serious technological edge, the Ottoman Empire and its gunpowder armies. At the Battle of Radanya, the age of cavalry was decisively ended by cannon and musket, and just like that, the center of power shifted again, this time to Istanbul. Egypt was no longer the heart of its own empire, but it remained what it had always been, an incredibly wealthy and strategically vital province. You could say it was the most important prize in the entire Ottoman realm.
I mean, just think about that journey. From an independent kingdom to a Persian satrapy, back to a kingdom under the Ptolemies, then a Roman province. It becomes the heart of Islamic caliphates, the seat of the powerful Mamluk Sultanate, and finally, a prized Ottoman province. Each and every one of these layers just added to its incredibly complex and resilient identity.
So what's the big takeaway from this absolutely epic history? The story of Egypt's rulers, it's not just a list of names and dates, right? It's a testament to a civilization so deeply rooted that it could endure, absorb, and ultimately transform its own conquerors, all while remaining undeniably Egypt. I think it teaches us something pretty profound, that while empires rise and fall, the prize itself, well, sometimes the prize can be eternal.